Here we go. Got some announcements to get out of the way real quick. If you're on the Substack, you already know, but yesterday I wrapped an interview with Jeff Gray from Honor Your Oath Civil Rights Investigation. My aim is to do maybe once a month, or depending on how often I can get people to sign up and talk to me. Basically, I'm going to try to do some long form podcast style interviews and post them just in sort of sporadic fashion along the channel. And so my first guest for that was Jeff Gray from Honor Your Oath Civil Rights Investigation. I talked to Jeff a little bit before he had started watching my channel, and we had talked a little bit in comments and email, and we'd had a couple really nice conversations. And I kind of think Jeff's one of those guys that's very selfless, and he doesn't put a lot of the focus of his channel on himself. So I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to try to get to know him and to try to see what kind of person he is behind the scenes. So basically that's the whole point of these sort of long form podcast style interviews, is just try to expand the platform into something a little bit different. So I wrapped that yesterday. I hope to have that up sometime in the next couple weeks. As part of that, Jeff and I have agreed to do a fundraiser for his local shelter. And so what we're going to do is we've got a cool announcement coming. So what's probably going to happen is that we're going to play part of the podcast on his channel, maybe to start, and then the second part will be on my channel. So that way people who aren't familiar with me can come to my channel and see the other half, and people who aren't, which nobody's not familiar with him, like I'm the only nobody around here. But so we're going to be doing it that way, and I'll be editing that over the next couple of days and hopefully get it up sometime in the next couple of weeks. And I hope to get other people on. I know I'm going to ask Lackluster and see if he wants to do it, and reach out to a couple more people and see how many people we can get on here. So that's the first announcement, excuse me. Second announcement is still trying to get people to Substack. I've got 86 people subscribed right now, which is great for like the first week and a half. But I have almost 30,000 subscribers, and I know that most of you guys can read. So please come over to Substack. It is free to join. I don't expect anything from you. As of right now, I haven't done anything for paid subscribers other than having a direct chat link to me that I'm not offering to everybody. I'm trying to build the platform for right now, but there are going to be paid tiers. There are paid tiers, $7.99 a month if you want to pay monthly, $79.99 if you want to save a couple months and pay annually. And then if you're really just a super big supporter and you want to just support, $199.99 for founding member. Also transitioning into a paid consultation model. So if you guys are interested in having me take a look at your case and you want a professional case evaluation, I'm doing that now. Also still able to contribute to Venmo and PayPal, which I'll put the links in the replay of this. So I'll be posting up this video as a highlight reel after it's over with, sometime probably Saturday evening or Sunday afternoon. Watched a video that really kind of blew me away the other day by another fantastic investigative reporter. I'm sure you guys know who he is, Jody Barr. He works for, I think, an outlet called Queen City News or something like that. I think he reports in South Carolina. Did a video that was about 45 minutes long. I wanted to cover it, but honestly, I don't feel like I should cut it up. I just want you guys to go check it out. If you haven't seen it, it's worth the 45 minutes to sit down and watch it. It's about a small town that's 1 square mile called, I would pronounce this McBee, M-C-B-E-E, but they refer to it as McBee, South Carolina. And it's about a guy who was a police officer there. And the whole idea is policing for profit, and what links the town went to, the sort of harassment and constant communication and reporting that he had to have with the mayor. And then this guy ends up getting ambushed on a traffic stop and nearly dies. This guy shoots him multiple times, like 60 rounds into his cruiser with an AR style rifle. And just a fascinating story. By miracle, he survived. But he was basically just what they called a cash cow in that town. And it's just a fascinating story about policing for profits. I think you guys would be fascinated by that, and I think you'd get something from it. So I'm going to be trying to do some new content styles to sort of see what lands, and basically I'll be kind of cutting up different ideas. I've been writing on the Substack somewhere around like the 1,000-word mark to just sort of give different perspectives and talks on Substack that's a little bit different. At some point, I may turn those into shorter, just sort of like direct, topic videos on and put them on the YouTube, similar to what Steve Lato does, although Lato covers, current events and cases and that kind of stuff. This is going to be more like just talking about different subject matters. Also, I didn't do the video for cops this week because I was under a copyright claim from the first cops video that I did. I was going to do one a week, and ultimately decided not to do one this week until I was sure that I was going to prevail in that, because you never know what YouTube's going to do. But I did prevail. I didn't get a copyright claim on the second one, so I should be green lighted to move forward with doing some more cops episodes, unless somebody tells me different. Which, again, like I said in my response, if a practicing licensed attorney explaining nuances in the law is not a case of fair use and privilege to use parts of the video, then there is no such thing as a fair use of someone else's copyrighted information. Anyway, on to Q&A. Let's get in the chat and see what you guys got going on today. Apparently, and I didn't know about this, apparently you guys heard about this Alabama police officer that shot and killed this guy last October during an attempted repossession of a vehicle. Essentially, what I can gather from the report is that there was a guy who lived in, I don't remember what part of Alabama, but somewhere in Alabama, and he had a tow truck driver, show up at his house in order to try to repossess the vehicle. He walked outside, displayed a firearm, and ran the guy off and said, essentially ejected him as a trespasser. Now, the way that works, a person is allowed to repossess property without a court order so long as they can do it without breaching the peace. So essentially, you have to have, if not direct consent to, so if I come to your house and I'm a tow truck driver and I want to repossess your vehicle because you haven't paid for it, then I basically have to come to you and say, we're here to repossess your vehicle, or I have to be able to get it when you aren't paying attention. But if you are aware that I'm there, you either have to consent or at a minimum not protest. I would probably refer to that as like acquiescence. Well, I'm not going to directly say you can have it. I'm also not going to go outside and fight you to keep you from getting it. So I'm not going to stand in your way. That would be like acquiescence in my estimation. So what actually happened in this kid's situation is he came out and he said, you're not taking the car, and you need to go do whatever you're going to do, but you're not going to take it over, without me trying to stop you. If the tow truck driver, when the owner of the vehicle or the person who's having the vehicle repossessed puts up any sort of resistance to it, that's pretty much called a breach of the peace. There's more to it than that, but essentially what has to happen then is that the person is supposed to go get a court order. Unless you can take it without breaching the peace, unless you can take it without disturbance, unless you can take it without having a showdown or confrontation, you're not supposed to take it without a court order. So what this guy in Alabama did, best I can tell, is that he went and called the police and said, I showed up to take this vehicle and this guy pulled a gun on me. Well, the guy was at his house in Alabama. So he ejected a trespasser and he was armed when he did it. That's not illegal, right? So what ends up actually happening is that without asking any questions, I guess, or without any sort of guidance from anyone who would know better, the police show up to assist this guy. Well, apparently there's a provision in Alabama law that says that you can't accompany someone who's breaching the peace. Like, it specifically designates. Since I haven't done the research, this is just all coming from the Rashad Ritchie report on the Young Turks network that I saw on YouTube. And so anyhow, the police show up. This guy comes out. He's still armed. He doesn't know they're police officers. He thinks this tow truck driver is coming back to, basically do what he just told him he couldn't do. They unloaded a magazine on this guy. You can hear 18 rounds in rapid succession. It's probably a Glock 17 with a 17 round capacity and one in the pipe, because it was just 18 straight in a row, like just basically mag dumped the guy. And so the officer tried to assert a stand your ground defense, and there was a Republican judge in the state of Alabama that was like, no, that's not. And so the idea is that the primary basis of an initial stand your ground defense in sort of any situation is that you have a lawful right to be where it is that you are when the confrontation happens. And so essentially what the judge was saying, and again, I'm probably going to do a video in this where I actually do the research and not just talking out of, like a very cursory understanding of what happened. But what the judge was essentially saying was that Alabama law prohibits you assisting this guy in breaching the peace by taking this repo. Therefore, you were breaking the law. You were a trespasser. He had superior rights, and you shot him for trying to eject you as a trespasser. You can't act as an agent of the state lawfully and show up as a police officer to assist a tow truck driver in repossessing a vehicle where it's going to be a breach of a peace. So it was an interesting sort of flip on what I would have ultimately thought the courts would have upheld a law officer's right to be there and acting as the police. But because the Alabama law specifically prohibits it, it sort of rendered the police officer as a trespasser. And I get comments all the time on my channel asking, can you use deadly force, or can you use force against the police to eject them as a trespasser? My answer would always be that would not be a very smart thing to do. And I wouldn't test the limits of the judiciary to allow you to do that. But in cases where it happens, it's sort of interesting to see how it plays out. Anyway, I don't know if you guys have seen that or not. Clinton says, how do you assert stand your ground on someone else's property? Not to mention it requires a judge's order warrant for cops to be present during a seizure. Right. I think that was the basis. You have to first have a lawful right to be where you are. And if you're breaking the law, you have a duty to retreat. Typically in a stand your ground situation, it's kind of like a teeter-totter. It goes back and forth. So if you're both legally where you're supposed to be, like in public, right, then it's, whoever the primary aggressor would have a duty to retreat. But if one of you is not legally where you're supposed to be, that person generally has a duty to retreat before the person with superior rights. So it gets very complicated. Kevmo said, saw the Jody Barr video. I quickly lost sympathy for the shot cop when it turned out he was a willing, even gleeful participant in the traffic extortion racket until the mayor hurt his feelings. I don't agree with that, but that's okay. I understand where you're coming from with that. I will say this, as I was watching that video, and maybe you're saying the same thing that I'm getting ready to say, I don't think that somebody should be shot over a traffic stop. I don't think it's right to shoot and try to murder police officers simply because they're police officers and they're going to write you a traffic ticket. So any world where you think that's cool to kill somebody because you don't want a traffic ticket that you'll have an opportunity to contest in court, I would challenge you on figuring out whether or not your soul's in the right place if you think murder's okay for a traffic citation. So I don't think it's a situation. I feel sympathy for anybody who gets. Now, if the guy was beating the ass off somebody, but he stopped this guy for doing 25 miles over the speed limit, there's a legitimate traffic stop to be had there. I don't lose sympathy for anybody who gets shot during that situation. I will say, though, I did see a sort of convenience factor, which I think is where my viewpoint would align with yours, in that I thought it was awfully convenient that he had an issue with this after the fact, but he didn't have an issue with it, or at least he was willing to your point, accept it for the purposes of keeping a job. One square mile town, my guess is he probably was not a good candidate for a law enforcement job at bigger departments, and so he was willing to make that trade. And so, I think there's probably some idea that he probably didn't know how bad it was going to be, but you're right. He had an opportunity to walk away before he got himself shot on the side of the road and chose not to do that. So I think at least in some ways I can align with what you're saying here. Kevmo says, thank you. And because Kevmo made the comment about this police officer getting ambushed, and I want to give him an opportunity to sort of clarify. So he says, thank you. My comment wasn't well thought out. I completely agree. He did not deserve to get shot at all. I clumsily and inarticulately meant to say that no longer saw him as a sympathetic figure. Yeah, and I apologize, Kevin. I wasn't trying to throw you under the bus. It's just I just try to respond to what you guys say at it, and I just have to take it for face value. So I appreciate the clarification. So Dennis says, Mr. White, I love your channel. What would you think of a judge that says he relies on muscle memory to conduct the business of the court and duty of his job? I guess it depends on the context. I think a lot of those guys rely on muscle memory. I think I would assume what the judge is referring to is to conduct the business of the court. For instance, now correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe you're talking about something very specific that I didn't know about. But like, for instance, in our criminal court, our judge, when he does pleas, he does the same exact thing every time. He says the same thing. He has basically a script that he uses to let everybody know what their rights are. So I think it would be dependent on why. And be careful about filing motions of recusal or motions to disqualify the judge, because you need to have a good basis for doing that. I don't think a judge saying that they rely on muscle memory to conduct the business of the court necessarily means that he's biased against you. So I don't know. You're asking me a very narrowed scope question about a situation that I don't have the factual basis to answer. So I'm answering on the fly. But again, I don't think that a judge saying that he's going to use muscle memory and run the court the way he normally does is necessarily going to show any sort of bias towards your case. So be really careful about that, because you may lose your motion if you don't have any grounds other than an assumption. Will said, hard to get a judge to say a judge did something wrong. I know you guys probably, there's a whole lot of ideas out there that judges run around protecting each other. I think that in small town politics, I think there's some truth to that. But when you file a motion to recuse, you're filing up to a circuit judge or an appellate court judge, and they don't protect each other. They may want to punt the issue because they don't want to they don't want to set a precedent from that court. So you might appeal an issue up to the circuit court or something, and the court might have some chicken shit reason for punting it, but it's generally not to try to protect another judge. It's generally because they don't want to take a position on an issue for, and it may be political reasons, but it's not generally to protect the other judge. It's not a difficult thing to get a judge disqualified, but you have to have some actual basis of bias before you can generally get it done. The judge has to have said something or done something that would lead you to believe that he can't be fair and impartial. Dennis says, I do appreciate your input on my question about the judge, which further makes me think more likely would be a dismissal than a recusal. Yeah, I mean, it depends on what stage. Like I said, I don't know anything about the specifics of your case, and this wouldn't be the format where I would go into it. If you want me to look at your case, like I said, I do that on a side basis. You can send me an email, but it's james@southerndrawlaw.com. Dismissal it depends a lot on, sometimes a dismissal doesn't mean anything at all. Like, for instance, in Tennessee, we have the lower court that's called General Sessions Court. There aren't very many things that you can get a dismissal over where the prosecutor can't then take the case and just submit it to the grand jury again. There's dismissal with prejudice and dismissal without prejudice. Generally, when you get a dismissal at a lower court level, it's not a dismissal that can't be refiled with the grand jury. Now, the judge may have made a finding that, hey, look, there was no probable cause or there's no evidence here, but that doesn't deter a prosecutor from submitting that case to the grand jury and trying to get a second opinion, basically a second set of eyes, a second bite at the apple, to get some other person with authority to make a probable cause finding to do it. So a lot of times cases might get dismissed and you might win at the General Sessions level here, but the bottom line is you're still going to possibly have to contend with a grand jury indictment if the grand jury finds probable cause. Dennis says it's hard to get much detail in these comments. I just wanted to see what your opinion on a judge making that statement was. My opinion on it right off the bat is that it's probably an innocent statement that you feel subjectively attacked by, and maybe based on good reason because you know more about the situation than I do, but it may not be taken that way by someone sitting in an objective capacity. You have to remember, you're not objective about your case. You're not. You're the one that was harmed by it. So you can't expect for other people to necessarily feel the way you feel about it because you're not objective. Yada Yada said, one of your subscribers got me interested in the Karen Reed case. Have you looked at any of that? I 100% believe this lady was framed by Elios. I believe, based on what I know about that case too, here's my problem, man. I'm really interested in the Karen Reed case. My problem is that it happens so fast and it takes hours to sit there and watch it. I just don't have time. I'm keeping up with trying to post as much and write as much on Substack as I can, and I just don't have time to sit and watch hours and hours of that stuff and run my law practice and do my regular stuff. So unfortunately, I don't have the freedom to sit and take a position or even watch the case as it unfolds in real time. I've kind of catching like highlight reels from other people's reporting on it. I don't know if I believe she's guilty or innocent. I don't think I have enough information to form an opinion about that, but I do believe that they do not have the evidence that is untainted to convict her. That's what I've come away with. Clinton Hansen says, oh my God, I listened to a lot of the case, and she's 100% been framed the injuries that John O'Keefe sustained. I will say that when I saw the autopsy, I don't know if it's autopsy photos or crime scene photos of his arm, it looked like a small puncture device, either teeth from some sort of animal or like an ice pick or something very, very small that caused the puncture wounds. It did not look like being dragged by gravel. There were two clean on the outsides of the wounds. What didn't look like sort of like the randomness that you would get with like an abrasion caused by concrete or gravel. So I do think that there's something there. It looked to me more like a dog bite or a small puncture with an ice pick than being dragged by a car. Mountain Mover says, my main life lesson is that being logical and rational isn't always the virtue you think it is. It can strip you of your morality. Yeah, I think I'd probably disagree with that, but that's okay. I think it depends. It's hard to take a position on some of your all statements. I'm not trying to offend you. It's just that I think it's actually the opposite. I think that your belief system can cause you to do things that you aren't privileged to do that can cause you a whole lot more problems. And I think it's a lot more difficult to arrive at a unreasonable spot if you're being logical and rational than it is if you're being passionate about something you don't fully understand. And so I think what you're saying is that sometimes logic and reason can cause you to maybe overthink stuff that you know in your heart is right or wrong. It's just that a belief system could be based completely on a fallacy, a logical fallacy. And that's why we see the stuff with the sovereign national stuff that I was talking about last week, where it's like, and I'm going to go into that a little further. I'm going to do another video to sort of explain why I took the position I did and why the historically legal position sort of obviates against their position. But the point I'm trying to make is that you can have a morality-based belief system or position on an issue that is based on your misunderstanding. And it's very hard to rid yourself of the emotion that pushes you in one way or the other. If you're using logic and reasoning, then you are doing that to the exclusion of emotion. And I think that's always your best friend. I don't think there's very many situations where emotion is not more dangerous than logic and reasoning. But that's my position. It doesn't have to be yours. That's just mine. Mark says, I've never heard a logical reason not to use logic and reason. Touche, sir. Touche. What is the legal basis for LEO misconduct to be paid by taxpayer funds? Various other fields mandate individual insurance. I don't know, Chris, that there is a legal basis for it other than qualified immunity. But I think what happens is that police departments indemnify their police officers, or cities indemnify their police officers, even where they lose qualified immunity, because I think it's very difficult to get people to be police officers right now. I think it would be even more difficult if police officers didn't feel like their city or their department was going to back them in the event that they lost a lawsuit. So it's sort of like a double layer of indemnity. And I don't think individual insurance, at least in this regard, would change it. And the reason I say that is because it's really the insurance companies that are paying this anyway. The taxpayers, it depends. It depends on the deductible and all this stuff. But sometimes the insurance company will deny the claim. Let's say you got a lawsuit for $100,000 and the town has a $10,000 deductible. So that's going to cost the taxpayers $10,000. The insurance company is going to pay the claim, and then the taxpayer will pay the raised rates on the insurance. So ultimately, it does trickle down to the taxpayer. But what we actually need is some changes in underwriting for insurance companies to exclude these sort of acts by police officers. And then I think that would change things. And then I don't think that it would be a bad necessarily for police officers to have individual insurance policies, but most insurance policies are not going to pay out for the things that would cause a police officer to lose qualified immunity. And so it's going to be pretty expensive to get an insurance policy to cover you no matter what you do. And it's a very thin slice of intentional conduct that can get you stripped of qualified immunity anyway. So I just think that the underwriting guidelines and the way insurance works are not consistent with what it takes to lose qualified immunity on a federal level anyway. Clinton said you'd never get paid if a cop had to pay out of his own pocket. That's true. That's another reason why, most cops are not. I know you guys don't believe this. You guys probably think that most cops make six figures, but the average police officer salary is like 50 grand a year, 55 grand a year. They're not making a ton of money now. In some of these big places, they are. Certainly in big cities. I saw the other day that the senior officer rate for Phoenix PD, which is an absolute dying shithole, is like $51 an hour, is like 110 grand a year or something stupid. Do law enforcement officers need a warrant to come arrest you on your property? No. Inside your house, yes, but not on your property. If they see you on your property outside, they can enter the property for the purposes of arresting you, so long as they have a reasonable cause to do it. It also depends on how close you are to your home and whether there was curtilage, and it depends on the state. So there's not really a clear-cut answer to that. It's always a better idea if they do have a warrant. Dreamland says, isn't having no consequences for a crime just to make cops feel they do not have to follow the law? I think that's true, Dreamland. I think that when you have no consequence, then it creates an opposite incentive structure. I think that's what you're trying to say, right? Is if there's no consequence for doing the bad thing, then you're sort of incentivized to not necessarily do the bad thing, but to do whatever it is that you want if you know that you're not going to step over some line that you're going to be punished for. Thank you, Dennis. And I thank you for your input through watching your channel. I've come to respect your viewpoints and your opinions. Here's what you always get from me is what I believe is the truth. Now, I'm certainly open to being wrong, but I will always tell you what I think is true. I don't think we do any service to each other by telling each other fairy tales. Julianne says, are civilian ride-alongs able to get out of the car to help the officer? So policy-wise, no, because there's a huge liability attached to allowing civilians to get out of the vehicle. But in an emergency situation, obviously, like if a police officer were in a situation where their life was in danger or something, nobody's ever going to do anything other than hail you a hero. And then Scott says, why would you want to help? Well, I think, Scott, logically, if you're going to, I don't know, if you're going to be the type of person who wants to ride along with a police officer, then you would obviously be more bent towards supporting law enforcement. So I think there's plenty of people out there that would stop and help. Guys, I don't know. This is probably piss some of you off. If I saw a police officer in trouble on the side of the road, I would stop to help. If I saw any person on the side of the road, I would stop to help. If I saw a police officer beating someone on the side of the road, I wouldn't stop to help. But if a police officer was being beaten and about to have his gun taken or whatever, I would stop to help. I would stop. Nobody deserves to die because of the job they do. And if we want to put somebody in prison for violating somebody's rights, fine. But just the idea that you're in a position to help any other human being on the side of the road from dying and you don't do it, I don't know. Maybe you're okay with that. I'm not okay with that for my sake. And Scott, I know you. I know that's not your position. I'm just curious. Maybe I unfairly addressed your comment. Brian from Here's the Deal. Hey, buddy. Thanks for popping in. He says, hello, friends. Don't forget it's Back to Blue till you're Black and Blue Day. Scott says, I was thinking more along the line of helping an officer protect and serve the shout out of someone. I think that comment speaks for itself. Yeah, I mean, obviously, if they're just beating the brakes off somebody, I hope you wouldn't help. I hope you'd seriously regret the fact that you thought it'd be a good idea to ride along. Or I hope you'd be a good witness and be like, yeah, no, that guy wasn't resisting at all. Officer dipshit beat the hell out of him. Needs to go to prison. Our police taught what probable cause is because many don't seem to truly understand justice. I wish that I could tell you that police officers understood probable cause. I don't think a lot of lawyers understand probable cause, to be honest with you. Probable cause at its most basic level is it more probable than not that a crime occurred, and is it more probable than not that the person that you suspect committed the crime? So it's not even about necessarily being able to prove all of the elements, but you have to be able to prove every single element, at least on a probability. So if the elements of, burglary is easy, right? Burglary is, at common law, is entering the property of another at night with the intent to commit a felony inside. So basically, did they enter the property? Well, if they didn't, then there can't be a probability that they committed burglary. Is the property of another. So many times police will get into situations where they don't even know whose property it is. And we talked about this. So I talked about this with Jeff when I did the interview with him about, police officers not understanding that they need the authority of the property owner in order to expel somebody. So do we even know who the property is owned by? And then the really hard part of burglary is to prove that the person had the specific intent to, or what they call mens rea, to commit a felony inside. I don't know. If it's a homeless person who wanted to get warm, I think you got an uphill climb. Is that going to keep them from arresting them? No, absolutely not. All right, Brian says, hey, James, we should do a police review live stream. We can pick a video and critique it. I think it would be informative. Hey, buddy, I'm happy to do it. I'd love to have you on sometime, and we can do that for sure. I think it'd be fun. All right, so Dwayne says, I believe the percentage of bad cops is directly related to the number of criminals in society. I would be curious to see what the proportionality of that is, right? I think there is some correlation, if just off the top of my head, because I think that you have a certain number of people that are just criminals. And I think that probably proportionally speaking, those people also find their way into law enforcement just like they find their way into other jobs. And so if 10% of the people in the world are criminals, I think it's possible that 10% of the police population also is represented by criminality. So I think that's probably true. Ray says, take a poor old country boy or one of his kids to court and take a well-off person and one of their kids to court and see what happens. No, look, the saying is that you are entitled to the best defense that you can afford. I try to disrupt the imbalance of that because at least 50% of my cases I take on a court-appointed basis, which is also why I know that just because you have a court-appointed lawyer or a public defender doesn't mean you have a bad lawyer, because I'm not a bad lawyer. I take cases people, and the state of Tennessee pays me $60 an hour with a $1,200 cap on cases that I would charge $5,000 to $10,000 on a retainer to just start the case on. But I do that because I grew up poor, and my life has been heavily influenced by the fact that a lawyer worked on a court-appointed basis as a guardian ad litem when my dad died to help out with the lawsuit. And so it made an impact to me. It's part of the reason that I became a lawyer. And so, I do that anyway, just because I think it's important that good lawyers do that stuff. But justice is supposed to be blind and not equal. Well, I don't know if that's true. I think it should be equal. I think that all the fuzzy things we tell each other about the justice system are a bunch of BS. A blind justice refers to the idea that justice should be impartial and objective without bias or favoritism. The concept suggests that everyone, regardless of who they are, should be treated equally. That's true. But there's a difference between law in action and law in the books, right? And I always get a little bit of trouble every once in a while by saying out loud in open court, that we have that pesky Constitution and presumption of innocence that keeps getting in the way. Scott says, I didn't realize that you were a public defender. That's freaking awesome. I'm not a public defender. The way the public defender actually works for the state, and they work for the Public Defenders Conference. What I do is I take cases that exist in conflict. So let's say you and Philip have committed a crime together as co-defendants. Public defender can only represent one of you because you might have diverging legal interests. And so the other person who the public defender doesn't represent gets a conflict private attorney paid on a private basis from the administrative offices of court out of the indigent defendant fund. So that's how that works. Our arrest reports subject to perjury. Many times they don't align with body cams, and I was curious if these differences get people on the Brady list. First of all, I think it's, and I want to do a video at some point that I think will help clear it up. It doesn't necessarily mean that a person can't testify because they're on the Brady list. Brady refers to the disclosures that the prosecutor is required to make in the course of proving a case. It's a required disclosure of potentially exculpatory information. So if a fact that the prosecutor knows would tend to exclude the defendant as a suspect, or even be positive or exculpatory in any way, positive for him. And in the case of a Brady list police officer, it's like we have to disclose that this police officer has credibility issues because the defense should have an opportunity to attack him on his credibility issues. And if we don't disclose it, it could be prejudicial to the defendant in a way that could get the case overturned. That doesn't mean they can't testify. It just means that that their credibility issues have to be disclosed to the defense. Arrest reports are not subject to perjury most of the time. However, here's what happens. Police officer arrives on scene, they do A, B, C, or D. They go there, write their report, blah, 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 blah. That report is hearsay. It's a legal definition of hearsay, right? It's an out-of-court statement that could be offered in court to use to prove the truth of the matter asserted in the statement. That's hearsay. It's not subject to perjury because it's not a statement made under oath. Here's what happens, though. Guys are lazy. And what they'll do is they'll write their narrative in their police report, and then they'll copy that and paste it into an affidavit that is subject to perjury. And so when you file it in an affidavit and the things that you say in the report are inconsistent, then you technically are under oath and you also are subject to perjury. So now ask me whether that matters. To us, yes. To the courts, you very rarely see police officers held accountable for misleading information in reports. Yada Yada says, have you ever defended someone you knew was guilty and got them off? Absolutely. Absolutely. And here's why. 98% of everybody that is introduced to the criminal justice system is guilty. They're guilty of what they're accused of. And I say this all the time because I'm a divorce mediator and I don't typically practice contested divorce law and contested parentage law unless there are a couple cases where I do. I had a really difficult time. So shout out to my ex-wife. You know, you made my life hell, but we're friends now. And I know she watches me on the internet. We're friends now. We have a 25-year-old. It was a very, very difficult divorce. We were both young. We shouldn't have been married to each other, certainly for not as long as we were. And it was a very difficult divorce. But I do take cases where I think that the guy is getting the shaft in the legal system because I know what it's like to not know what to do in a situation where you felt like you were not being fairly treated in a custody dispute. I take those cases. I don't generally take contested divorce cases, but I take divorce mediation cases. And part of the reason is because I like being part of the solution as opposed to part of the problem. And I always say that it's so much easier to deal with a person charged with a crime because most of them are guilty. They know what they did. They know that they stole a generator because they needed to feed a meth habit, and they realized they were probably going to go to jail, and they already did all that. They're very reasonable in their expectations. So it's just so much easier to deal with criminals because they know what they did, and they're actually not that hard to hold accountable. It's more like they don't necessarily have the evidence that they think they have. They have a hunch. And I like the puzzle solving and the problem solving stuff when I know for sure that the state can't prove the case. I'm never, ever, ever going to plead somebody guilty to something that can't be proven simply because I know they are guilty. I would just turn my law license in before I do that because the Constitution is way more important to me. I don't care what you did. I do care in every single case how the state would go about proving it, because if they you, they will f the rest of us. And I'm never going to be part of that at all, ever. So anyway, sorry about the language. What are your thoughts on a Tennessee state trooper calling you racist under oath in a preliminary hearing? I think that a Tennessee state trooper is entitled to his opinion. And I don't think that I think it's problematic. Okay, I don't think it's illegal. And unfortunately for you, if he'd said it on the street, you could sue him for defamation, but saying it in a judicial proceeding there's an immunity for that. So you can't do anything really about it legally. Hey man, what about Brian from Here's the Deal jumping into the live stream? That was awesome, guys. I appreciate that, Brian, if you're still lingering. But thank you so much for popping in and patronizing the channel. All right, guys, y'all have anything else? Scott says if someone is on the Brady list and it's not disclosed, it depends on what the nature of the testimony is. If it's like Mark Furman, yeah, I think so. But it's all going to be up to the judge. Ego always gets in the way of constitutional educational thinking. Well, ego gets in the way of everything, right? I was telling somebody that I think I was telling Jeff the other day in our interview. I was talking to him and we were talking about responding with ego and that kind of stuff. And I said, I can't think of a single time when emotion was the basis instead of logic for whatever I was going to do. And that was a great decision for me. When a prosecutor disparages a defendant during closing, isn't that considered prosecutorial misconduct? No. It depends on what you mean by disparages the defendant. These words all have different meanings, right? It just depends on what you've proven. The prosecutorial misconduct is to try to, when you convert yourself to a witness, you're not a witness. What you say as a lawyer in court is not evidence. And so you have to be really careful not to cross a line into unduly prejudicing the jury by saying something that isn't in evidence, that's just your opinion or just the way you see it. The rules of the court are very, very different than the rules of like common sense everyday life. So no, disparaging a defendant is just saying something bad about him. If the thing that you're saying is bad and it's true and the evidence in the record supports it, there's nothing wrong with that. It just depends on what you've proven. The guy traveling with the monkey was denied body-worn camera in discovery. It just depends. I mean, in Tennessee, you're not allowed to have discovery till you get indicted. So it depends on the state. You're not entitled to anything in discovery until you're indicted in the state of Tennessee. So anything you get is a gift from the prosecutor, is the way that the law looks at it. So you get what they're going to use for probable cause, because the only part of the preliminary stage is leading up to probable cause or leading up to a grand jury indictment. So you get what the state is going to use for probable cause, and anything else comes after the indictment. You're not even officially charged in this country and not entitled to discovery in a lot of places until you're not officially charged and not entitled to discovery in a lot of places until you're indicted. So it just depends. I'm not sure. I think that was Georgia. I'm not sure what Georgia's rules are. But anyway, guys, I appreciate you hanging out with me. Remember to head over to Substack. And if you don't like reading or you don't want the news, it's fine. I'm just going to start putting stuff in there that you won't see on the YouTube channel. And then sometimes the things that you see on the channel will be a reference back to it. So if you want to kind of like get the behind the scenes and the whole picture, then head over and join the Substack. It's free to join. Again, there are paid tiers if you're interested in that, but no obligation. I certainly appreciate anything you can do, but don't expect anything from anybody. Appreciate you guys supporting my channel and doing everything you do to help me. So please remember to like and subscribe and leave a comment on the video. Check out some of the other videos on the channel and leave a comment on there as well. Until I see you again, take care. Always film your interactions with the police and keep your evidence to yourself.